uploading onto our YouTube channel. Rachel's hitting it now. If you do not want to appear on video, that's fine. It only records the person who's speaking in the yellow box. But if you do want to ask a question, please feel free to just type your question into the chat box, and Rachel and I will pose it in the Q&A a little later on. And if you do or don't mind, we're happy to just let us know, and we're happy to call on you, and you can ask on camera. All right, well, I'll hand things over.
Yes, we're so delighted to be co-presenting this evening's event with our great friends at Yaddo. Yaddo is a retreat for artists located on a 400-acre estate here in Saratoga Springs, New York. Its mission is to nurture the creative process by providing an opportunity for artists to work without interruption in a supportive environment. And it's a huge part of the local cultural community and really the worldwide cultural community. For those of you who don't know this already, Yaddo's virtual fall benefit is coming up next week, and it sounds amazing. So David has nicely dropped a link into the chat box so that you can find out more about that and hopefully attend, because it's going to be really cool. Tonight, our guest author is going to be interviewed by Garrett Graff. Garrett Graff is a distinguished magazine journalist and best-selling historian. He covers politics, technology, and national security, and is a contributor to Wired and CNN, and the author of multiple books, including the #1 national bestseller, The Only Plane in the Sky, An Oral History of 9/11, as well as The Threat Matrix, Inside Robert Mueller's FBI, and Raven Rock, about the government's Cold War doomsday plans. He's also a great friend to the Northshire Bookstore, and memorably did a great interview there back in February in the Manchester Northshire, back when we could do things like that. And hopefully we'll do that again when we can do them again in the future. And then I am so pleased to welcome Tim Weiner back to Northshire in this new virtual setting. He was saying before we came on tonight that he's done events in the Vermont Northshire for all his last 4 books. And we were lucky enough to host him in our Saratoga store back in 2015 when his wonderful Richard Nixon biography, One Man Against the World, was released. And that's an event 5 years ago, but I remember it very, very fondly. He has won the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Award for his reporting and writing on national security and intelligence. He covered the CIA, the war in Afghanistan, and crises and conflicts in 14 nations for the New York Times. He has taught history and writing at Princeton and Columbia, and he's with us tonight to talk about his brand new book, The Folly and the Glory. Please join me in welcoming Tim Weiner and Garrett Graff.
Thank you, everybody. The Folly and the Glory, America, Russia, and Political Warfare, is the history of the last 75 years of warfare between America and Russia. It's political warfare. And political warfare is all the means at a nation's disposal, short of actually going to war. It's the full spectrum from diplomacy to covert operations, from friendly persuasion to sabotage and subversion. And the story of the book is that we won the 20th century and they're winning the 21st. That's it in a nutshell. And you can see their pursuit of political warfare against the American political system, against American democracy, against the American body politic, every day. We're going to see whether they win the next battle on election day. Garrett, over to you.
All right. Well, Tim, it's great to have a chance to talk with you about this, and thank you, Northshire and Yaddo, for hosting us tonight. I know that I speak for Tim when I say we're sorry that we can't be there in person at the Manchester store or even the Saratoga store, because it would be a lot more fun to be there in person. But I'm excited to have the chance to talk to Tim from the comfort of his home and my home here in Burlington, Vermont, Tim down in Brooklyn. So Tim, one of the things I think I want to start by asking you about this, you know, and just I'm obligated to start for the participants with a plug for just what a good book this is. And I had the opportunity to read it in galleys. My endorsement of it is on the back cover of the finished book. So I come into this a fully biased observer that this is an excellent book. But part of what surprised me in reading this was how much of this story I didn't actually know. That, I'm someone who I would have told you I had covered, I have covered these topics for years. I would have told you I was well versed in this. And there were entire chapters of this book that I just knew nothing about. And so, Tim, I think, you have written, the definitive history of the CIA, one of the great histories of the FBI. You've done, tons of national security reporting on all manner of topics over the years. What made you think that there was actually something more to say about the Cold War and Russia and the US? Sort of, where did this book come from, and how did this concept come together in your mind?
Well, Garrett, I first walked into the CIA headquarters in 1987, and I called them up and said, "Hey, I'm going to Afghanistan, where you guys are running a secret operation, shipping hundreds of millions of dollars of weapons to the Afghan Mujahideen, the Holy Warriors, who are fighting the Red Armies, the Soviets, who have occupied their country." I said, "You guys do country briefings, don't you, for reporters going to strange places? How about it?" And the public information officer at the CIA scoffed at me and said, "Absolutely not," and hung up on me. So off I went to Afghanistan, 3 months of jihad, and came back with my new beard. And I hadn't been back at my desk in Washington a day when the phone rang. "Tim, how are you?" Guess who? The guy from the CIA, the public spokesman for the CIA. He said, "How'd you like to come in for that briefing now?" I said, "That'd be great." So off I go to the CIA. It's 7 miles outside of Washington in Langley, Virginia. Through the checkpoints, into the lobby, beautiful lobby. Onyx, marble, soaring atrium. And up on the left-hand wall, as you walk in big gold letters, is the inscription from the Gospel of John. It says, "And ye shall know the truth, and the truth will make you free." So I'm hooked at this point. Go up, talk to the 4 Afghan analysts, the CIA, and they really only want to know one thing from me, which is, what's it like? Because they've never been within a country mile of Afghanistan. And yet they're analyzing the progress of jihad. So go down, walk back at the lobby, look over my right shoulder now at the inscription, and said, "I'm going to cover this place like other reporters cover the cops and the courts. This is what I'm going to do." 5 years later, at the end of the Cold War, the director, Bob Gates, said, "We're going to declassify our Cold War history, warts and all." Well, Garrett, the clandestine service of the CIA did not like that, because there are a lot of warts. 15 years, it took 15 years for the pig to move through the python of declassification, and there be a critical mass of declassified information about the CIA so that I could write my history of the CIA, Legacy of Ashes, on the record. 12 years have passed since then. And slowly, the declassified history of CIA is revealed, like a glacier melting and revealing the rock underneath. There's a chapter in the book about Poland, about a disastrous operation and a successful operation 30 years apart. The successful operation was life support for Solidarity. The trade union movement in Poland kept them alive in the 80s. Solidarity wound up being the domino that overturned the Soviet Empire. When, the nightmare of the Soviet system was revealed in the revolt of the proletariat against the system. There are 20th century stories in this book that nobody's ever heard of, not just you, Garrett. There's a story of CIA support for the dictator of the Congo, Joseph Mobutu. There's the story of how the United States tried to fight back against Soviet disinformation in the 80s. The disinformation of the Soviets was really the brainchild of the head of the KGB, Yuri Andropov, who ran the KGB in the 60s, 70s into the 80s, and then became the leader of the Soviet Union. Disinformation, Soviet and Russian disinformation, KGB disinformation, then and now, had three goals: undermine Americans' faith in their national security institutions, the FBI and the CIA. That was number one. Ever hear that the CIA killed John Kennedy or the FBI killed Martin Luther King? That's KGB disinformation. Ever hear that the United States Army invented the AIDS virus in a germ warfare laboratory in Fort Detrick, Maryland? Millions of people still believe that to this day. KGB disinformation. Vladimir Putin is the heir to Yuri Andropov, both as the head of Russian intelligence and as the strongman leader of Russia. And Garrett, there's a straight line that runs through these stories from the end of World War II to today. People think the Cold War was then in the 20th century, and this nightmare we're going through now with Russia attacking our democracy, that's a whole different story. They're one story.
So one of the things about this book that struck me was, you have written so much about the CIA before, traced a lot of its successes and myriad failures. I'm not spoiling the thesis of a book called Legacy of Ashes, but your sort of general belief has been that there are more failures on the CIA's books than successes. I'm curious how this project, and looking at this 12 years later, changed your perception of the CIA, changed your belief in how in the role that it played in the Cold War, and sort of what should we make of the legacy of the CIA in this particular fight?
Covert action is a drug for presidents, secretaries of defense, secretaries of state. They have a problem that they can't solve through diplomacy or through the military. They sent in the CIA. The CIA just got formed in 1947. They didn't know the first thing about covert action. The Russians have been at this since Peter the Great. They've been at it for centuries. So our lack of knowledge of how to do these sorts of things and a distaste because of the secrecy of the CIA for coordinating things with policymakers, secretaries of state, secretaries of defense, led to a series of cascading failures. What the CIA had in the 20th century in the Cold War that the KGB did not was money. Lots and lots of lovely money. If it wanted to sway an election, as it did in its very first covert operation ever, to steal the Italian election of 1948, suitcases full of cash. If it wanted to reverse the results of an election, as it did in Chile in 1970, it could create the conditions for a coup. If it wanted to buy the allegiances of entire political parties, create entire political parties, it created the ruling party in Japan in the 1950s, the Liberal Democratic Party, which is neither liberal nor democratic or party, but still runs Japan to this day. When the Cold War ended, the successes of the CIA were not only its ability to outspend the CIA. There were, and we learned The CIA learned, the United States learned through bitter experience and failure, that if you did things on a small scale, the butterfly effect was more effective than sending billions of dollars of weapons to the Mujahideen. We did that. It was a short-term success. The Afghan rebels drove out the Soviet army, but the country, awash in weapons, without any follow-up from the United States, was the incubator of Al-Qaeda, an unforeseen consequence of CIA support for the Afghans. The great problem today, Garrett, is that political warfare, again, the full spectrum, not just covert operations in the CIA, but diplomacy, economic support, and intelligence operations. We don't do it anymore. For good or for ill, we're out of the game. The war on terror consumed everything. Counterterrorism was the first and last goal of the CIA and the FBI. We took our eye off the ball. We took our eye off traditional espionage, which is just gathering information, really, and created the conditions for the Russians to launch the political equivalent of 9/11, the attack on our democracy. Nobody died, but American democracy received a grievous wound in an unexpected attack from an unexpected direction. And that's where we stand today.
So in my experience in covering in intelligence, sort of one of the other things, there's sort of two things that come that stood out to me in your book that sort of ring true to me from covering in intelligence and writing about national security. One is that, and maybe this has to do with the money reason that you just mentioned, that the US is generally better at technical collection and technical intelligence wizardry. And the Soviet Union / Russia is generally better at human operations, the sort of human intelligence. And the second thing that really stands out in this book, which is something that has always stood out to me in covering Russia and the US, is Russia has a strategic patience that the US just never has. And that you sort of watch the Soviet Union, then Russia's ability to carry out operations over decades. And sort of the clearest example of that being the illegals program, what the FBI calls Operation Ghost Stories, and the inspiration for the FX series, The Americans, where you had these deep cover operatives living inside the United States for decades, and that the U.S. actually watched for decades. Part of what is fascinating that we're just seeing and learning this fall, Peter Strzok, the FBI agent in the midst of the Mueller imbroglio, talks about in his memoir this fall how on 9/11 he was actually already assigned to one of the surveillance teams tracking the illegals couple in Boston, when he an operation that these illegals weren't in the end arrested until 2010. My question, I guess, for you, Tim, though, is like, how does the U.S. learn patience in political warfare? Or is a democracy just such a different system that sort of we will never be able to possess the patience necessary to carry out some of these operations?
Secrecy and deception are not our strongest suits, Garrett. We're an open society. It is easier for a hostile intelligence service like the KGB and its successors to penetrate an open society than it is for the CIA to penetrate a closed authoritarian society. The penetration by Russian and Soviet intelligence of America and of American government has been deep and long-standing, going back to the 1930s. They had a United States congressman on their payroll in the 1930s named Samuel Dickstein. If you go down to the Lower East Side of Manhattan, you'll be standing in Samuel Dickstein Plaza today. This guy was selling the Soviet spies of the day fake passports and holding public hearings targeting Stalin's enemies in America. That is an agent of influence. Very specific definition. Someone in a position of power or authority who can sway public opinion or public policy in Russia's favor. You can think of many others throughout the years. Alger Hiss at the State Department was a Soviet spy. They had a spy inside the Justice Department's Foreign Agents Registration Division named Judith Copeland. They had spies at the Treasury. They had more spies at the State Department. They had spies at the OSS, the Wartime Civilian Intelligence Service. They had spies in the 70s and 80s and 90s running Soviet counterintelligence at the FBI and the CIA. They cleaned our clock. And they distorted American perceptions of what was going on in Russia. You can count the number of successful CIA and FBI penetrations of Soviet Russia and present-day Russia on the fingers of two hands. And you'll have some fingers left over. Without that kind of intelligence gathering, we will be surprised, as we were surprised by the Russian attack on the 2016 election, and as we will be surprised by what they're going to do to us in the next 5 weeks. And I want people to read this book to be aware of what political warfare is, how it operates, to understand a threat to our democracy.
The most stunning chapter in this book, which you and I have discussed on multiple occasions, is the Congo, which you mentioned a few minutes ago. Give us sort of the book talk version of the craziness that unfolded in Congo in the middle of the 20th century.
In the late 1950s and early 1960s, nations all over the world that had been captive under colonialism shook off their colonial masters. And the largest of these nations was the Congo, which had been controlled brutally by Belgium for 85 years. And selected Congolese leaders were invited to Brussels, and they elected a prime minister named Patrice Lumumba. And neither the Americans, who had huge interests in Congo, uranium that built the atomic arsenal, gold, diamonds, strategic metals, neither the Americans or the Belgians liked Patrice Lumumba. And with the help of the CIA, he was overthrown and later assassinated while in chains by a Belgian paratrooper. In his place was a bought and paid for CIA agent named Joseph Mobutu, soon proclaimed himself General Mobutu. He had been a colonel, and the ruler of the Congo. Support for Mobutu, CIA direct straight cash payments to Mobutu to help him run the government, pay off the leaders who supported him, was approved personally by President Kennedy and amounted to millions of dollars a year, and approved by President Johnson after that, and approved by President Nixon after that. Support was unremitting. American support for this dictator who became a kleptocrat, who robbed his country blind, stole $5 billion in gold and diamonds and natural resources, all the extractive industries of the country. A murderous, tyrannical kleptocrat was our bulwark against communism in Africa. Why did Americans support this man until he was finally toppled from power 33 years after the CIA helped cement that power? Because the Cold War was over. The conflagration that emerged from the collapse of the Congo, almost unnoticed in America, was an African World War III that consumed 5 million lives. These are the consequences of pragmatic decisions made by presidents in the Cold War, in the war on communism.
So let's come back to present day a little bit, or quasi-present day, because one of the things that you lay out in chapter after chapter, and you've mentioned a couple of them already here tonight, is the way that the US CIA meddled in other nations' elections successfully and unsuccessfully across decades in the Cold War. And you have a number in the book. I think you might remember it off the top of your head. I think it's something like 117, 137 elections.
Between Washington and Moscow, there was direct covert election interference in 117 elections in other countries during the 20th century, second half of the 20th century.
Yeah. And you hear President Trump and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, previously CIA Director Mike Pompeo, sort of write off what Russia did to the United States in 2016 as, you know, this is more of the same. They do it to us all the time. We do it to them all the time. What do you think of that as an argument? And does 2016 stand out to you as something that is fundamentally different than the long legacy that you lay out here of election interference?
You know, Garrett, I'm doing this podcast based on the book called Whirlwind. And I've talked to a number of former CIA directors, among many other people. And I had a talk with Mike Hayden. General Hayden ran the CIA under President George W. Bush, former director of the National Security Agency before that. Spent his entire life in the national security world. And General Hayden said that what the Russians did to us in 2016 and what they are continuing to do to us today is the most successful covert operation in the history of modern intelligence. And it succeeded in part because Vladimir Putin has in Donald Trump an agent of influence. Trump amplifies Russian propaganda pretty much every day. Trump distorts American foreign policy in the Kremlin's favor. He kowtows to Vladimir Putin. And that is no secret. The question is why. I mentioned before the American Congressman Samuel Dickstein, who was an agent of influence for Moscow in the 30s. Donald Trump is an agent of influence for the Russian Federation in the White House. It is no secret that he kisses Putin's ring, that he echoes Putin's propaganda. The question is why. And that question, which is the great counterintelligence question of the 21st century, has never been addressed. It has never been investigated. The FBI started an investigation and it vanished into thin air. It is possible that it is going on in the greatest secrecy as we speak, but I really doubt it. I think the Trump Justice Department strangled it in its crib, clubbed it to death, put it in a U.S. Postal Service sack and threw it in the Potomac.
And we see the reporting from your old employer over the last couple of days about the president's tax returns and
Pretty good scoop, right?
Yeah, pretty good scoop. And the question of these $421 million in debt that the president has coming due over the next 4 years, and without any sense of who owns that, who owns the people who own that.
Have any theories, Garrett?
Well, you know, I wrote a piece for Wired, which is my writing home, you know, 2 years ago, looking at the questions of whether the Trump organization was effectively a massive money laundering scheme for Russian wealth.
Yeah, I think you were onto something there, dude.
And I have no knowledge of the tax returns beyond which what I have read in the New York Times over the last couple of days, but it continues to be a puzzle that the president is sinking an enormous amount of cash into his Scottish golf courses that appear to both cash that doesn't actually appear to come from anywhere, nor actually go anywhere, since the Scottish golf courses continue to lose money.
Garrett, the $421 million in debts, which are coming due in the next couple of years, and most of which Trump is personally on the line for, not the Trump org. Trump is personally on line for this. They raise two questions. One, to whom is this money owed? And how is this money going to be paid back? Who's going to finance Trump's debt? You and I think some of our audience today know a few things about how security clearance works in this government. The number one red flag for a security clearance is unexplained debt. Donald Trump could not get a security clearance in any government, and especially in the American government, given what we now know about his finances. It is enormous national security risk in and of itself, leaving aside who his creditors are, because Vladimir Putin knows, because he runs an efficient intelligence service, a good deal about Trump's finances. And the knowledge is in itself compromising information. It's compromat. So when we ask ourselves why Trump kowtows to Putin, we have several theories, which I explore in The Folly and the Glory. One, he's a bolesny durak. He's a useful idiot. And he does Putin's bidding because he doesn't really know what he's doing. Two, he is an agent of influence, which is personally the theory I subscribe to. Putin flattered him on the campaign trail and offered him political support, including, but not limited to, covert political support. Putin gains influence over Trump, and Trump exchanges his influence in return. Everything with Trump is transactional in one way, shape, or form. And then there's the money. And it's, you know, pretty much always about the money with Trump. If Trump is out of office, he loses the invisibility cloak of presidential power. And I think we will come to find out the answer as to why he kisses Putin's ring. And it's not going to be pretty.
Let me ask you sort of one question building off of that actually harkens back to another one of your books. And then we'll start to open it up for questions from the audience on the off chance that anyone actually has any questions about Russia, US intelligence, Trump, or any of the other headline grabbing topics we have mentioned over the last 35 minutes. You wrote a biography of Richard Nixon, and now a lot of a lot of sort of the meat of the modern frame of Folly and the Glory is Donald Trump. And I wonder, as a historian who sort of thought deeply about these two men, two of the three presidents who have faced, four presidents actually, I guess, who have faced impeachment. What sort of stands out to you and unites them, and how do you see them as different and the same?
There is a line that runs from Richard Nixon to Donald Trump, and that line is Roy Cohn, who had been Joe McCarthy's counsel during the Army McCarthy hearings and his protector, who was, against stiff competition, possibly the most crooked lawyer in the United States for many years, was utterly amoral, utterly ruthless, and imbued some of that ruthlessness into both Richard Nixon and Donald Trump, whom he also counseled for the last decade of his life. There's a shamelessness in the work of Roy Cohn that imbues the political lives of both Richard Nixon and Donald Trump. A shamelessness and a recklessness.
And do you see them, how do you see them as different? Sort of what
Nixon was way smarter. Nixon had a much better sense of power. I mean, say what you will about Richard Nixon, but he understood American foreign policy. He had been vice president for 8 years under Dwight Eisenhower, possibly the most masterful president in foreign policy in the years since World War II. He'd been all over the world. He knew things. Donald Trump is Richard Nixon on Twitter minus 50 IQ points.
Richard Nixon on Twitter would actually be a really fascinating historical thing to try to play out. He actually does seem like he would take to it during the same dark night hours that Donald Trump does.
The aperçus of Richard Nixon on Twitter would be something to behold.
Yeah. So, Rachel, I'm fine diving into the chat here and starting to take some questions. So,
yep. Go right ahead if you'd like to, or we're happy to pull them out for you if you would rather. David and I take care of that.
So, so anyone, if you are out there and have a comment, long or short, just let us know in the chat, and we would love to open up this conversation. Kate asks the first question, which is effectively, I'm told Trump is not only morally bankrupt, but moreover has multiple bankruptcy filings himself. How does he continue funding, with or without foreign funding, his business adventures?
Through debt, through the skillful manipulation of debt. And with the help, which remains mysterious, of one of the world's most suspect major banks, Deutsche Bank. That's all I can tell you about that.
Talk to us a little bit about the Jeremosa Doctrine and sort of what you learned about it in the course of this book and what America should know about it.
Jeremosa was a Soviet and then Russian general on the general staff. And the doctrine, in short, is that, and it was crystallized in something he wrote 7 years ago, is that all warfare is based on deception, and all warfare in the future will be decided by information warfare. And by information warfare, we mean propaganda, disinformation, and the control of cyber operations that can distort what you, the opponent of Russia, perceive. The ability of the Russian cyber commanders, their trolls, their social media puppets, to get inside the head of the President of the United States and senior Republicans in Congress and get them to dance to a Russian tune is one of the most remarkable achievements in the history of intelligence operations. And we don't know the half of it.
What did this book teach you about what U.S. intelligence needs to be doing better? What if you were going to be sitting down with a new CIA director or a new director of national intelligence? What advice would you give them out of this book about what we have done well or not well?
The next president of the United States, if there is one, is going to have to pick up the pieces of a large and powerful machine that Donald Trump has shattered and undermined. And imagine the power of America, diplomatic, military, intelligence, economic, as a big orchestra, a philharmonic orchestra, and everybody's got instruments. There is no sheet music now. The instruments are broken and cacophony ensues. The next president will have to be both conductor and composer, get the band back together, as it were, and conduct it and make it play in harmony. It's a mammoth task.
And what do you think, in terms of sort of strategy, what has the U.S. Sort of succeeded at and not succeeded at as you look back over these 75 years of political warfare?
When America was able to project its power by representing American democracy as a far superior form of government, a far superior way of life than Soviet communism, which is kind of a no-brainer, it succeeded. One of the great crises of the present day is that we cannot project American democracy. American democracy is in deep, deep trouble. And the authoritarian form of governance that Vladimir Putin represents is a much more attractive model in much of Europe, for example. There are nations, former Soviet satellites like Poland, Hungary, the Czech Republic, that the United States embraced into the NATO military alliance at the end of the 20th century because they looked like they were becoming democracies. They are not functioning democracies right now. And in part, that is because we are not a functioning democracy right now. We have been wounded by Russian intelligence operations, and we are rubbing salt in those wounds ourselves. We're doing it to ourselves right now.
And that's really one of the things that comes through in the 2016 reporting around what Russia accomplished in their attack on the United States was, what Russia's success and the success of the Internet Research Agency online really was exacerbating existing political division. That Russia it doesn't really have the ability to inject division that didn't already exist. What it has the ability to do is to stoke fire and to sort of exploit the seams of Western democracy as they already exist.
The number one target of Russian information operations in the 2016 election were Black Americans. And by rubbing salt in the wound of American race relations, they sought out to suppress the Black vote, which the Trump campaign did too. The ability of what the Russians were doing and what the Trump campaign did and is doing today to work in harmony is breathtaking.
Marcia Kranz in the chat asks about Bill Barr and sort of how he fits into this political mess that we are living through today. And I want to sort of frame that actually in the context of your answer about Roy Cohn, that, Donald Trump has sort of repeatedly
where's my Roy Cohn?
Where's my Roy Cohn? That Jeff Sessions was not in his corner in the way that he expected the Attorney General to be. Bill Barr clearly is. Talk to us a little bit about your view of Barr and his work on the in the Justice Department over the last 18 months or so.
Barr's central role has been to try to erase the evidence gathered through the criminal and counterintelligence investigations of Robert Mueller and the FBI, to exonerate the guilty, to investigate the investigators, to nullify jury verdicts against Trump's henchmen, like Mike Flynn and Roger Stone, and to pervert the administration of justice to protect a deeply corrupt president and a deeply compromised president. And history will not be kind to William Barr. Lest we forget, some 30 years ago, William Barr was the Attorney General too, under President Bush the Elder. And he managed to get the criminal convictions and the criminal investigations and indictments of senior Bush administration officials, up to and including the Secretary of Defense, on Bush's pardon desk at Christmas 1992, as he was about to leave office, and Bush pardoned them all. And that was the final cover-up of the Iran-Contra investigation, and William Barr did that. So he knows what he's doing.
Mm-hmm. I think we've got time in here for one or two more questions. If you want to drop one or two more questions into the chat, please do so. One of the questions that I think a lot of people are struggling with, and Deborah asks about this in the chat right now, is, how do you play chess against someone who has upended the chessboard and strewn the pieces all over the room? And what I mean is, how does Joe Biden take on Donald Trump? What are your sort of thoughts and predictions about the debate tonight, and how you think Biden should tackle debating Donald Trump?
I'm not sure there's much Joe Biden can do at this point. We are now deep into what the great Soviet-born author, journalist at the New Yorker, Masha Gessen, calls the authoritarian attempt. Donald Trump has signaled, he's not hiding it, that he will not accept the results of the election, and that he will stay in power no matter what the vote is. And I'm not sure Joe Biden has got a trick in his trick bag to deal with that we're in deep trouble, folks. And the only way around it is a massive landslide vote that would prevent Trump from claiming that he won against all evidence.
Relatedly, Tim, do you have any thoughts on what you expect to see from Russia over the next 5 weeks?
Intelligence officers divide, when they're looking at what an opponent will do, divide what they see and what they can try to find out into capabilities and intentions. I don't, and I'm not sure anyone does, know what Russia's intentions are, except that they want to create chaos, and Trump is the chaos candidate. In terms of their capabilities, they can, as they've been doing, launch ransomware attacks against the companies that provide software for election tallies. They can get into voter registration rolls and create havoc. They have the capability to bring down the electrical grid of a large city on election night. That would create chaos.
And do you think, how strongly do you think Russia is tempted to play its hand over the next 5 weeks? Because you talk about sort of a realm of projects and operations with varying levels of deniability that would provoke presumably varying levels of response from the
counterforce from this president, who won't even grapple with the fact that Russians have paid bounties to kill American soldiers in Afghanistan. This president will never counter Russian intelligence operations. I think the best way to put it is that chaos is their candidate, Trump is their vehicle, and having pulled off the most successful political warfare operation since the Trojans took in that horse, I would be stunned if they sat on their hands and said, let the American people decide.
Mm-hmm. Kate in the chat asks, how did the FBI and the CIA get so far behind technologically? You know
that answer, Garrett. At the time of the 9/11 attacks, and for some time thereafter, FBI agents could not send emails to each other. Isn't that right? Mm-hmm. They couldn't download a picture on their computers. In the late 90s, the FBI director, Louis Freeh, called in the head of systems operations at IBM to tell him, what could be done about this problem, which had been a problem, for 20 years. And the guy said to the director of the FBI, you guys aren't on life support, you're dead. And while things have gotten marginally better, the FBI is no longer a pyramid of paper as it was at the turn of the 21st century. There's an inherent problem here, and you, Garrett, have written about this brilliantly. If you want to protect information within the American government, you have to go to a higher level of security. If you want to share information among the FBI, the State Department, the CIA, you have to go to a lower level of security. And this is a dilemma. Every level of security that you escalate within your system screws things up. If your goal is to share and coordinate information and operations. And nobody's ever solved that. Mm-hmm. That is the central problem of cybernetics.
And let me ask you a final question there on, we have seen the US in recent years actually become more aggressive in cyberspace. The US actually did, and President Trump has actually acknowledged this now, so the NSA can talk about it. the NSA and U.S. Cyber Command attacked the Internet Research Agency over the fall of 2018 to try to protect the midterm election and discourage further interference. Do you think
they're back, aren't they, Garrett?
They are back, though.
Reconstituted.
Do you think that with a change of presidents, that the U.S. is in a position where it will have turned a corner in how it conducts political warfare or acknowledges and engages in political warfare? Or is this an area where you think that just as a democracy that turns over its leadership as regularly as we do, with different branches of government pursuing different priorities, that we will sort of always be behind in this?
This president has broken the machinery of American national security. The next president, if there is one, will have to rebuild it. And that includes not only putting competent individuals in charge at the top of the pyramid, but rebuilding faith in those institutions that this president has attacked as Nazis and stormtroopers, faith in American diplomacy. This president has attacked American diplomats as human scum. We're broken. We are a broken country. We are a failing democracy. Russian intelligence operations have created some of that failure, but their triumph was to put an agent of influence and an agent of chaos in the White House. We can't calibrate how many votes, how many minds Russian disinformation operations swayed. But it didn't have to be a lot, did it? They were certainly a contributing factor to the election of Donald Trump, if not the decisive factor, a decisive factor. And that is a tragedy for American democracy. And if we don't get back in the game, there'll be trouble ahead.
Tim, thanks so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure talking to you tonight. The book, The Folly and the Glory, I highly recommend it. An incredible lesson in history that, as I said, I thought I knew, and I turned out to have been blown away page after page throughout reading this. So Tim, thanks so much for what you have done throughout your career, most recently with this book, to shed the light on some of the most opaque chapters of recent American history. Thank you, Northshire in Manchester and Saratoga, for hosting us, and Yaddo for helping put this together tonight. This has been a great conversation, Tim, and I really appreciate the chance to talk with you.
One final word, again, thanks to Northshire. Thanks to everybody in Manchester and Saratoga Springs and out there in Zoom land. If you want to learn more about this, I've just started a new podcast called Whirlwind that is based on the book, Folly and the Glory, but also goes above and beyond. And I have had more fun doing this in the last couple of months than I've had in a long, long time. It's really worth a listen, and I encourage you to tune in. Called Whirlwind. Check it out.
Great.
Just found a link to that. I'm popping a link in the chat with information on Tim's podcast, Whirlwind. So that link is there.
All right.
Tim and
Thanks
Garrett,
you all
thank
for
you
tuning
so
in.
much. This was fascinating, if disturbing, but we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us tonight. Audience, great to see you, and we'll see you back for more great Northshire Live events through the rest of the week and the rest of the month, and for as long as we keep doing this. Yeah. Thanks, everyone, and have a great night.
Appreciate it.